You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. When Justice William Brennan retired from the Supreme Court in 1990, President Bush had his eye on Clarence Thomas as a potential nominee among a short list of 5 candidates. Despite this interest, several reasons held back an immediate nomination. Thomas had been a judge for just 8 months. There was an anticipation that Bush could nominate him for Thurgood Marshall's position in the future, and many of Bush's senior advisors doubted Thomas was ready for the Supreme Court. Ultimately, Bush opted for Judge David Souter of the First Circuit, who was confirmed without much fuss. John H. Sununu, the White House chief of staff at the time, assured that the next nominee for the Supreme Court would be a staunch conservative, expecting a fierce battle for confirmation. In July 1991, this promise materialized when President Bush nominated Clarence Thomas to succeed the legendary Thurgood Marshall, marking the first African-American justice and a civil rights champion. President Bush introduced Thomas as the most qualified to follow in Marshall's footsteps, a statement that raised eyebrows among critics like Michael Gerhardt, a constitutional law expert. Gerhardt pointed out that despite the president's praise, Thomas's resume was relatively thin, marred by a controversial stint at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and just over a year as a federal Court of Appeals judge. Michael Gerhardt later reflected on the nomination in 1992, seeing it as a strategic move by President Bush. By nominating Thomas, Bush not only aimed to place a firm conservative on the court, but also to corner civil rights groups and African-American communities in the South, who might find it difficult to oppose Thomas after vehemently opposing Robert Bork's nomination. Gerhardt criticized this as a return to nominating highly ideological candidates to the Supreme Court, a practice many hoped had ended with Bork's rejection. Before President Bush nominated Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, Attorney General Richard Thornburgh cautioned him that picking someone who wasn't seen as aligned with the views of Thurgood Marshall, a revered figure in civil rights, would complicate the confirmation process. As predicted, various organizations, including the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Urban League, and the National Organization for Women, were upset by the Thomas nomination. They were concerned that Thomas might shift the court to the right, particularly because of his criticism of affirmative action and doubts about his stance on Roe v. Wade. Traditionally, in the latter half of the 20th century, the American Bar Association reviewed Supreme Court nominees before the Senate Judiciary Committee took over. Expecting that the American Bar Association might not favor Thomas, the White House and some Republican senators pushed for a qualified rating and tried to paint the American Bar Association as biased. Eventually, out of the American Bar Association Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary, 12 voted Thomas was qualified, 1 abstained, and 2 voted not qualified, making him qualified by a narrow margin. This outcome was one of the least supportive for a Supreme Court nominee, and though it was somewhat embarrassing for the Bush administration, it didn't significantly affect Thomas's nomination. Remarks from Thomas's opponents hinted at the challenging confirmation battle ahead. At a conference in New York City in July 1991, African-American attorney and activist Florence Kennedy anticipated a fierce opposition to Thomas, referencing the failed nomination of Robert Bork by saying, "We're going to Bork him." This comment pointed to the strategy liberal groups would adopt, mirroring the campaign that derailed Bork's nomination. With this backdrop, Thomas's confirmation hearings were strategically approached as a political campaign by the White House and Senate Republicans. The public hearings for Clarence Thomas's nomination commenced on September 10, 1991, and continued for 10 days. Senators delved into Thomas's legal perspectives, examining his past speeches, writings, and decisions he had made while serving as a federal appeals court judge. Thomas consistently maintained that he had not taken a stance on Roe v. Wade, nor had he discussed the case with anyone. Early in the hearings, Joe Biden, who was leading the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, challenged Thomas with a question related to the book Takings, Private Property, and the Power of Eminent Domain by Richard Epstein, published in 1985 by Harvard University Press. Holding the book, Biden criticized its ideas, which suggest that the government should be treated like any other private party in disputes over property. The Cato Institute later summarized Biden's questioning vibe as asking Thomas whether he was, in essence, a libertarian. Following intense discussions on September 27, 1991, The Judiciary Committee decided by a vote of 13-1 to forward Thomas's nomination to the full Senate, but without giving it their seal of approval. An earlier attempt that day to endorse the nomination resulted in a tie, 7-7. The allegations of sexual harassment against Clarence Thomas by Anita Hill weren't known publicly until after the committee had finished its evaluation, marking the first time any claims of inappropriate behavior by Thomas were brought to light. On October 6, 1991, in the midst of the Senate's debate on whether to confirm Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, a major story broke out, reported by National Public Radio's Supreme Court correspondent Nina Totenberg. She revealed details from a confidential report by the Judiciary Committee and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The report contained allegations made by Anita Hill, a law professor at the University of Oklahoma, who had worked with Thomas at the Department of Education and later at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Hill accused Thomas of making inappropriate sexual remarks during their time working together. In the same report, Thomas shared that he had chosen Allison Duncan over Hill for the position of his chief of staff at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The seeds of this controversy were planted right after President Bush nominated Thomas, when Democratic staff members of the committee began to hear whispers about Thomas's alleged past sexual harassment incidents involving women. In early September, responding to these concerns, Committee Chairman Joe Biden requested that the Bush administration allow a Federal Bureau of Investigation inquiry into Anita Hill's allegations. The Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted interviews with Hill and Thomas on September 23 and 25, respectively. Despite these allegations coming to light, Biden did not see a need to delay the committee's vote on Thomas's nomination. However, after Totenberg's report was aired, Joe Biden faced significant pressure from Democratic women in the House and various groups opposed to Thomas's nomination, urging him to reopen the hearings. Consequently, the final Senate vote was delayed, and the confirmation hearings were reopened, a rare move in the Senate, having occurred only twice before since 1925. During this heated period, President Bush expressed his total confidence in Thomas, indicating the administration's firm support for the nominee amidst the escalating controversy. On the morning of October 11, 1991, Anita Hill took the stand to share her insights regarding Clarence Thomas's suitability for the Supreme Court. She expressed mixed feelings about labeling Thomas's actions as illegal sexual harassment, but stressed their relevance to his character and professional integrity. Back in 1981, Hill had joined the United States Department of Education as a legal advisor to Clarence Thomas. She then followed him to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in 1982, when he became its chairman, serving there until her departure in mid-1983. During her 1991 testimony, Hill disclosed that while working under Thomas at both the Education Department and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Thomas repeatedly made sexually explicit comments. Hill explained her decision to follow Thomas to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was based on her interest in the civil rights work being done there, despite previous sexual advances from Thomas, which seemed to have ceased. She had been keen to contribute to the civil rights field, although she had reservations about the Department of Education's effectiveness. In her testimony, Hill recounted disturbing behaviors by Thomas, including his discussions of sexual acts depicted in pornography, boasting about his sexual abilities, and specifically naming a pornographic actor, Long Dong Silver. Another notable incident she described happened at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where Thomas, holding a can of Coke, provocatively inquired if anyone had placed pubic hair on his drink. Angela Wright and Rose Jourdain stepped forward to support Anita Hill with their statements to Senate staffers, but the Judiciary Committee did not let them testify. The situation surrounding why Wright did not testify is complicated. Some Republican senators were hesitant to have another woman describe inappropriate behavior by Clarence Thomas, while some Democratic senators were worried about Wright's credibility. Additionally, Wright herself was hesitant after witnessing how the committee treated Hill, especially with Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter, accusing Hill of lying through her testimony. During the nomination process for Thomas, Wright and Hill were the only ones who came forward, claiming that Thomas had made unwanted sexual advances, but Hill was the only one to take the stand. Angela Wright, who worked under Thomas at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and was fired by him, shared with Senate Judiciary Committee staff that Thomas had made unwelcome comments to her, similar to those made to Hill, including pressuring her for dates and making remarks about her body and the bodies of other women. Wright pointed out that after she rejected Thomas's advances, he started criticizing her work more and eventually fired her. Thomas, on his part, reasoned that he terminated Wright for poor performance and for using derogatory language. Rose Jourdain, although she did not testify, confirmed Wright's experiences, recalling how Wright had confided in her about Thomas's behavior, which left Wright feeling very uncomfortable and distressed, to the point of tears during one visit to Jourdain's office. Another colleague of Thomas, Sukari Hardnett, who also did not accuse Thomas of sexual harassment explicitly, contributed a statement indicating that being a young black female employee who was also attractive and worked closely with Thomas meant you were constantly being evaluated in a personal way. On the afternoon of October 11, 1991, during a pivotal moment, Thomas firmly rejected the accusations aimed at him, emphasizing, "I deny each and every single allegation against me today that has even remotely suggested that I engaged in any sexual conversations or discussed pornographic material with Anita Hill, or that I ever made any attempt to date her, had any kind of sexual interest in her, or harassed her in any manner." Clarence Thomas vehemently criticized the process, saying, "This investigation into these allegations turned into a hunt for scandal by some committee staffers, with the information then being leaked to the media. The committee and the Senate gave these accusations unwarranted legitimacy by airing them on national television." He likened the hearings to a high-tech lynching, expressing his view that the proceedings were not just a public inquiry, but a disgraceful spectacle, particularly condemning for ambitious black Americans who wish to think and act independently. He argued that this sends a clear warning: deviate from the expected norms and you will be metaphorically lynched by the Senate, as opposed to literally being hung from a tree. During the hearing, Senator Orrin Hatch questioned Thomas about specific graphic allegations made by Hill, including whether Thomas had ever made a remark about finding a pubic hair in his Coke, or referred to Long Dong Silver in conversations with her. Thomas categorically denied these claims, including the suggestion that he had referenced The Exorcist, where a character comments on discovering a pubic hair in his gin. During the 3 days from October 11th to 13th in 1991, the judiciary did not only hear from Hill and Thomas, but also from several other witnesses. These individuals came forward to speak in favor of Clarence Thomas and to challenge the claims made by Hill. In addition, records of phone calls that showed Hill and Thomas had been in contact after she left the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission were presented. Jane Campa J.C. Alvarez, who worked as a special assistant to Thomas at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for 4 years, defended Thomas by stating, "The Anita Hill I knew before was nobody's victim." She described Thomas as someone who held high standards for professionalism and would not tolerate any improper behavior, making it clear that, in her view, Hill's accusations seemed to be driven by personal motives. Alvarez emphasized that typically, anyone who truly experienced harassment would seek to distance themselves from their harasser, not follow them to another job, especially someone with Hill's impressive credentials. Nancy Fitch, who served as a special assistant historian to Thomas, confidently stated there was no chance Thomas did what Hill alleged. Diane Holt, Thomas's personal secretary for 6 years, shared that she never noted any discomfort from Hill when she was around Thomas, nor any hint of the behaviors described in Hill's allegations. Phyllis Barry Myers, another special assistant, spoke of Thomas's respectful and professional demeanor and suggested that Hill might have been seeking a more personal relationship with Thomas. Nancy Altman, who worked alongside Hill and Thomas at the Department of Education, expressed disbelief that Thomas could engage in such behavior without it being noticed by any of the numerous women who worked closely with him. Senator Alan K. Simpson expressed confusion over why Hill and Thomas would continue to meet and communicate after they no longer worked together if the alleged harassment had occurred. On October 15, 1991, the Senate cast their votes regarding Clarence Thomas becoming an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and the result was 52 in favor to 48 against his confirmation. Breaking down the votes, Thomas received backing from 41 Republicans and 11 Democrats, while 46 Democrats and 2 Republicans didn't support his nomination. From the day Thomas's nomination was put forward to the Senate until the day the vote took place, 99 days passed. This duration was the second longest wait for a nominee since 1975, with only Robert Bork having a longer wait of 108 days. Moreover, the percentage of Senate votes against Thomas's confirmation, at 48%, was the highest opposition faced by a nominee who was eventually successful since 1881. Back then, Stanley Matthews faced 48.9% opposition from the Senate. If needed, Vice President Dan Quayle was ready to step in with a tie-breaking vote in his capacity as President of the Senate. Thomas officially joined the Supreme Court as its 106th member 8 days after his confirmation, on October 23. He took the necessary oaths of office sworn in by Justice Byron White. This ceremony was originally slated for October 21st, but got delayed due to the passing of the wife of Chief Justice William Rehnquist. Some say Anita Hill's testimony sparked a nationwide discussion about sexual harassment, leading to what many consider the start of modern awareness of the issue in the United States. This moment is also connected to 1992, dubbed the Year of the Woman, a time when a notable wave of liberal women were elected to Congress, with some referring to them as the Anita Hill class. Additionally, Michael Isikoff has pointed out that Hill's case had an impact on how the media reported the sexual harassment allegations against Bill Clinton in the 1990s. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.